In my last video, I looked at the best combat sports athletes of all time from next to every country on earth. So if that video didn't push enough buttons by itself, in this video I'm going to pick out the top 20 combat sports athletes from that video and rank them. One thing to clarify before we get started is that this isn't a greatest combat sports athlete list per se, as only fighters that I picked as the nation's best combat athlete in my previous video are eligible. So essentially that means it's the top combat sports athletes of all time, one per country, which makes a huge difference in who you will see in this list. If it was simply the best combat sports athletes of all time, you'd see like 3 or 4 from Brazil alone. Comparing athletes within the same sport is difficult enough and open to so much room for subjectivity, and this is magnified exponentially when we are looking across combat sports. First and foremost, this is my opinion. I have a hierarchy of combat sports to help with the weighting, which I discussed in the previous video, and above all, I value success in multiple combat sports. So if you missed that previous upload, it's a long one, but I highly recommend you watch it before this one, and let's just get started on ranking the top 20 combat sports athletes with a limit of 1 athlete per country. My pick for Australia, former UFC featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski, starts our list at number 20. I think a consistent theme for any great champion, regardless of discipline, is how they can change the outside narratives and commentary on themselves and their career through results. There was a time around Volk's Aldo and first 2 Holloway fights where there was a lot of casual chatter discrediting Volkanovski and his status as the best featherweight in the world at that time. How things have changed, and through 4 dominant featherweight title defenses and pushing the formerly thought next to invincible lightweight champion Islam Makhachev to the absolute limits, Volkanovski has become one of the most celebrated and widely respected fighters to ever compete in the UFC. Competing in a UFC division defined by all-time greats, Alexander Volkanovski is firmly in that conversation, helping usher in a modern generation of mixed martial artists who are technically and physically impressive wherever the fight goes at any stage of the fight. Coming in at number 19, we have my pick for Switzerland, karateka and kickboxing legend Andy Hug. Hug was a pioneer and arguably the most important fighter in the early stages of the Japanese kickboxing revolution during the 1990s. Hug would start his career as a Kyokushin karateka and win multiple titles, including the European Heavyweight Championships twice in 1985 and 1989. After moving his career to Japan, Hug would make a name for himself in K1's predecessor Seito Kaiken events, where he would win the 1992 Karate World Cup. Andy's classy and respectful attitude, along with his karate-rooted style, which included his signature axe kicks and his linear blitzing style, helped him become one of the first foreign fighters to connect with the Japanese audience during the initial stages of K1 and the heavyweight kickboxing boom. The Swiss karateka would win the 1996 World Grand Prix and finish runner-up in the 97 and 98 iterations, making him not only one of K1's most popular competitors, but one of the most successful. Hug would suffer a sudden and untimely death in the year 2000, aged 35, after a short battle with leukemia, shocking the martial arts world. Highlighting how popular and loved Hug was with the Japanese people, over 12,000 people attended his memorial in Tokyo. In the every country's best fighter list, one of the more hard done by combat sports was definitely wrestling, with only 15 wrestlers picked total, with many of them also being MMA fighters. This is easily explained by great wrestlers being concentrated in only a handful of nations, but I did want to make special mention that wrestling fans, I see you, one of the most difficult combat sports to succeed in, but in saying that, we are going with our only pure wrestler on this list with my pick for Iran, freestyle wrestler Hassan Yazdani. Hassan Yazdani's consistency in the sport of freestyle wrestling for over a decade at this point is starting to get ridiculous. One of the best hand fighters to ever grace the mat, through multiple injuries that would end a lot of wrestlers' careers, through multiple weight classes, Hassan has persevered through and hasn't lost to anyone not named David Taylor in 9 years. Medaling in every World Championship and Olympic Games since 2016, Hassan has mastered the hallmarks of Iranian wrestling, being the heavy footwork, low guard stands and ironclad hand fighting. I believe Hassan has at least one more chapter left in his career before retiring, and he can establish himself as one of the best freestyle wrestlers of this generation. I think Lennox Lewis is the closest we've had to a perfect heavyweight boxer. I'm not saying he's the greatest heavyweight boxer or most accomplished, although it's an argument to be had. What I'm saying is that if you took all the heavyweight greats and had a look at what you needed to add to them, whether that be physically, technically or mentally, to make them quote unquote perfect, you wouldn't need to add much to Lennox Lewis. One of the biggest compliments you can give to Lewis is that when you talk about a fighter, you tend to highlight their strengths. But with Lewis, the conversation really is around trying to dissect what his weaknesses were, which, spoiler I guess, there weren't many. At best you could say Lewis had a nasty habit of losing focus, which directly led to his 2 losses, but technically and physically there really isn't anything to point to. He had one of the most effective jabs and clinch engagements and thus distance control the division has ever seen. One of the nastiest uppercuts, and was smart and patient, and only took what was given to him, whether that be in the first round or the last. Lennox Lewis has beat every boxer he has ever fought, was a unified heavyweight champion and Olympic gold medalist, and if you had a time machine, I think a prime motivated Lennox Lewis is the favourite against any of the heavyweight all-time greats in their respective primes. It's going to be a very long time until Joanna Jędrzejczyk is no longer a unanimous pick for the female UFC Mount Rushmore, and honestly that day may never come. Taking a step back, Joanna had an incredibly impressive Muay Thai kickboxing career in itself, reportedly going 37-3 in amateur Muay Thai and not losing to anyone not named Valentina Shevchenko. In this amateur run, she would win the IFMA World Championships 5 years in a row between 2009 to 2013 and would show the hallmarks of her style that would take her to being a multiple-time world champion as a professional kickboxer and eventually to a dominant UFC championship reign. These hallmarks being the high number combinations that mix up between high and low consistently and effortlessly. As great of a Muay Thai kickboxer Joanna was, she will undoubtedly be remembered for being a trailblazer and pioneer for not only the strawweight division in female MMA but female MMA in general, bringing a striking ferocity to the sport that was instrumental in putting the female divisions on the map. I truly believe that if Joanna Jędrzejczyk never existed and never had her 2-year title reign, the female MMA scene would look very different to what it does today. The legendary commentary line of right leg hospital, left leg cemetery has got to be one of the most iconic in all of combat sports, and there is no better way to introduce number 15 on our list, Mirko Cro Cop. Focusing on Cro Cop's kickboxing career, he was a solid top 10 in the heavyweight division during the absolute pinnacle of heavyweight talent in K1, notably finishing runner-up in the 1999 Grand Prix. During this run, his signature left leg would put away some of the best heavyweights to ever compete in the sport. As great of a kickboxer Cro Cop was, he was an even more accomplished and successful MMA fighter, and will likely be remembered as one of the great MMA heavyweights, with his kickboxing career becoming more of an introductory chapter. His blitzing style and ability to close the distance rapidly translated to MMA success much better than his kickboxing rivals of the time. In MMA, he would notably win the 2006 Pride Openweight Grand Prix and the 2016 Ryzen Openweight Grand Prix. Mirko Cro Cop is easily the most successful kickboxer from the golden age of MMA's heavyweight division when comparing success in MMA. And when you consider he has won Grand Prix in both sports across K1, Pride and Ryzen, I think he is a bit underrated as one of the most successful combat sports athletes of all time. Teddy Riner, in terms of pure competitive success, is next to undeniably the greatest judoka to ever live. Riner is a 3-time individual Olympic gold medalist in 2006, 2016 and 2024 and is an 11-time world champion, the most in judo history. He has also won 5 European championships and numerous other international titles. Between 2010 and 2020, Riner went on an unprecedented 10-year unbeaten streak, winning 154 consecutive matches. Standing at 6'8" and weighing in at over 130 kilograms, Riner possessed an imposing physical presence. However, there are a lot of big boys in judo, so his success is not just due to his size. His technical prowess, agility and strategic mindset made Riner next to unbeatable during his prime. He particularly excelled in using throws like the Uchimata and Osotogari, and is known for his ability to outmaneuver opponents in gripping exchanges. Over a career spanning nearly 2 decades, Riner has adapted his style to remain dominant against evolving competition. His success in both the openweight and heavyweight categories demonstrated how effective his technique was, even against the largest competitors. The fact that there are still professional fighters competing today with all the discipline, coaching and science and technology that couldn't go 15 hard rounds in a boxing ring, while Carlos Monzón in the 1960s and 70s could ease through 15 rounds while also being a serial alcoholic and smoker, just highlights what an unbelievable talent the Argentine was. Look, he wasn't the greatest human to ever exist, but if you don't have Carlos Monzón in your top 3 middleweight boxers of all time, wouldn't be the worst take, but he really should be in it. Apart from 3-0 losses very early in his career, Monzón would absolutely wreak havoc on the best middleweights the division had to offer. Upon first glance, Monzón can look a bit awkward, sloppy and fighting quite tall. But as the fight wore on, you saw just some of the best utilization of a heightened reach advantage ever seen in the sport of boxing, using his legendary jab to keep the fight exactly where he wanted at all times. During his run, Monzón would hold the undisputed middleweight title for 7 years and defend the title 14 times, before retiring at the absolute pinnacle of the sport. Julio César Chávez has got to be one of the most polarizing figures in all of combat sports in terms of the social discourse around his career. One side like to spout on about how he has one of the most padded records amongst all the all-time greats and lost too many big fights, which look isn't exactly false, but then you have the other side which talk about him being in top 5 of all time and that he was so dominant that he made the competition look bad. As with most things, the answer lays somewhere in the middle and both sides can both be at least a little bit correct. The objective facts are Julio has the most title fights, most title fight wins, most title fight defenses and the second most title fight wins by KO, and has 24 fights against world champions. Even with a relatively lower level of competition in his early career, these honours alone put you automatically in the top 25 boxers of all time for me. The myth around Julio's early career being padded, I also feel has swung too far in the realm of exaggeratory, and discredits the quality of the up-and-coming talent coming out of Latin America at that time, simply because they never made a name for themselves in the States. I don't know how this segment turned into a bit of a dying on the Julio César Chávez all-time great hill, but I truly believe he is at the absolute pinnacle in respect to the modern era of boxing. Is there any argument against Valentina Shevchenko being the greatest female combat sports athlete of all time? I mentioned it in Valentina's entry for Kyrgyzstan, but she is literally a Russian master of sports in Taekwondo, boxing, kickboxing, judo, and an international master of sports in Muay Thai. Like, it's not easy to earn these master of sports titles. It depends on the sport itself, but it typically involves medaling at a national level competition. Let's just go through the highlights for the sake of it because it's kind of ridiculous. In judo, she was the 2002 Kyrgyzstan national champion at 57 kilograms. In Taekwondo, she won the ITF Asian Championships in 2002 and the European Championship in 2005. In boxing, she is the 2007 Russian Women's National Amateur Champion, and this is all before we even get to her Muay Thai kickboxing career where she would win the IMFA World Championships 8 times and is a 2-time K1 champion. This resume by itself is utterly ridiculous and probably earns her a spot on this list considering we left some achievements out. But on top of all of this, Valentina is undoubtedly a Mount Rushmore pick in female MMA, being a 2-time flyweight champion with 7 defenses alone in her first reign, and she is still going. Undeniably a combat sports all-time great. I feel I've almost been hyperbolic in this video thus far, and I'm going to keep this going with the statement that as a lifelong martial artist and martial arts fan with thousands upon thousands of hours watched across multiple combat sports, Tenshin Nasukawa is the greatest striking talent I've ever seen. I've been paying close attention to his career ever since seeing him live at a Rise event early in his career, and watching Tenshin as his career progressed has really felt like watching a movie character rinse his way through everyone in his way during the most competitive era of his divisions. Ending his professional kickboxing career undefeated with 42 wins, culminating in winning arguably the biggest kickboxing match since the early K1 days, beating Takeru and thus securing his place at the top of what will be looked upon as the early stages of the golden age of Japanese kickboxing. Retiring from the sport at just 24, he would already be looked upon as one of the sport's all-time greats. And if he continued in the sport, there is little to suggest he wouldn't secure his place at the top of the mountain. Across combat sports, Tenshin has competed in MMA, kickboxing, and now boxing, and is undefeated in all three disciplines since turning pro. Tenshin's unorthodox combinations, Swiss watchmaker level of timing, and the signature pop and crispness has left Tenshin a puzzle no one has been able to solve yet, and it will be interesting to see if he can replicate this level of success in professional boxing. MMA is a young sport in its current format and level, and there is so much history and development to still happen. But when we do look back on the history of the sport in a couple decades, I believe we will look at Georges St-Pierre as a pivotal figure in ushering the shift from fighters as specialists to fighters as competent everywhere. Georges St-Pierre is widely regarded as one of the greatest mixed martial artists ever, where he is a former champion in 2 divisions. GSP retired with an impressive professional record of 26 wins and 2 losses, with both those 2 losses avenged in rematches. His consistency and ability to maintain dominance across multiple eras of the sport landed him in the UFC's Hall of Fame. GSP held the UFC Welterweight Championship twice and defended the belt a record 9 consecutive times during his second reign. During this reign, he showcased his versatile skill set and the ability to neutralize the strengths of a diverse range of opponents. GSP is renowned for his well-rounded skill set, excelling in striking, wrestling, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, with his ability to adapt this skill set to his opponent's strengths while executing precise game plans, setting him apart in what will be soon considered early MMA. His wrestling, particularly for someone who did not come from a traditional wrestling background, was considered revolutionary in MMA, and this blueprint of a rounded skill set has since become mandatory to succeed in the highest level of MMA, and Georges St-Pierre is one of the more important names in this shift. The only recognized 8th division world champion with 12 titles won throughout his career, Manny Pacquiao is the definition of pound for pound great. Often undersized and outside of his natural weight class, Pacquiao would compete at his very best every single time in every single weight class. Champion at 112, 122, 126, 130, 135, 140, 147, and 154, 5 lineal titles, the only fighter to win a championship in 4 different decades, and probably could have been a 10 division champion if he didn't skip 2 divisions. If anything, Pacquiao is undeniably one of the most fan-friendly boxers in terms of entertainment value, a true speedy Filipino swarmer who also had well-rounded fundamentals. In practicality, he really was a rhythm fighter, and he would force all his opponents to compete at his inhumane pace, bell to bell. Boxing itself is an incredibly hard sport to compare all-time greats among, and I think it really depends on what you value in a career. But I think Pac-Man is a very close to top 10 all-time fighter. For my money, Giorgio Petrosyan is the greatest kickboxer to ever live. Anyone who follows my channel knows how much I love the golden era of K1's heavyweight division, so you know how much weight it carries when I say Petrosyan is the GOAT, but not only that, I don't think second place is particularly close. Petrosyan boasts a mental professional record thus far of 106 wins to 3 losses to 2 draws, with most of his victories coming by way of precise and controlled domination. Nicknamed the Doctor for his surgical level of precision, Petrosyan is renowned for his defensive genius. His head movement, timing, and footwork allow him to evade strikes and counter with pinpoint accuracy. He is often credited for elevating the importance of defense in kickboxing, making some of the world's most elite opponents punch air for rounds on end. Petrosyan has claimed titles in multiple major promotions, including K1 World Max, Glory, and One Championship, cementing his status as the best across different organizations and eras. His victories in the 2009 and 2010 World K1 Max tournaments were particularly iconic, and is often credited as some of the best performances in kickboxing history. Petrosyan is celebrated for his impeccable technique, blending speed, power, and precision seamlessly. His mastery of range and distance control makes him a nightmare matchup for any opponent. If you ever want to learn how to kickbox, his fights often serve as clinics in kickboxing fundamentals, and his influence on modern kickboxing will be seen for decades in the future. Coming in at number 6, we have our pick for Panama and the last one-sport athlete on this list with the legendary Roberto Durán. As a lightweight, Durán was next to invincible, and in my eyes is the greatest boxer the division has ever seen. But what makes Durán so legendary is how well he competed undersized across multiple weight classes, winning the lightweight, welterweight, light middleweight and middleweight titles, not to mention holding one of the greatest wins in boxing history, beating a prime Sugar Ray Leonard in their first fight. Durán was one of the craftiest inside fighters to ever play the game of boxing, with an absolute mastery of inside angles, hand trapping and guard manipulation. But you don't become a top 5 all-time great without having a well-rounded skill set, and Durán could really do it all. He just worked his best in the short range because, well, he was often the shorter fighter, which has reflected in him becoming known as one of the sport's best pressure fighters. But don't make the mistake in thinking Durán was just a brawler. During his long and active prime, there really wasn't anyone like Durán. The pure embodiment of the spirit of a warrior, the smallest of the 4 kings and fought like he was the biggest. A true combination of speed, power, timing and anticipation, and one of the greatest boxers of all time. If you had to ask which kickboxer achieved the most in the least amount of fights, the only answer is Alistair Overeem. In a record of only 10-4, Overeem is one of the most accomplished kickboxers to ever compete in the heavyweight division, with wins over Peter Ertz, Gokhan Saki, Badr Hari and Tyrone Spong, and of course achieving the single greatest accomplishment the sport has to offer, winning a K1 World Grand Prix and placing 3rd place in another. This puts him right near the top of a tall mountain in heavyweight kickboxing. The crazy part is that even though he is an all-time great kickboxer, he will likely be remembered for his MMA career, where he is a former Strikeforce and Dream heavyweight champion and had a long stretch at the top of the UFC heavyweight division. Overeem fought in a similar style across both MMA and kickboxing, where he would bully his opponents with knee strikes from the clinch and control distance with leg and body kicks when at range. He would use these energy sapping techniques before barraging in with some power boxing once his opponents wore down. Considering Overeem's accomplishments in both kickboxing and MMA, he is undoubtedly one of the best combat sports athletes to ever live. The fighter of the decade for the 2000s, the face of Pride Fighting Championships and arguably the greatest heavyweight fighter of all time, at number 4 we have our pick for Russia, Fedor Emelianenko. Before we get into his legendary MMA career, Fedor is a 6-time Russian combat sambo champion and a 3-time world champion, often competing in the sport in between his MMA fights. From 2001 to 2010, Fedor went on a 28-fight undefeated streak, dominating his way to becoming a mythical figure in the sport, becoming the 2nd ever Pride heavyweight champion and holding the belt for 1,663 days until the organization's closure. He would also win the 2004 Heavyweight World Grand Prix and further cement himself as the best heavyweight the organization ever saw. Fedor has defeated 7 former UFC champions and is the longest reigning lineal champion in the division. Fedor is one of the most important fighters in the history of MMA, establishing a level of technique, ferocity, well-roundedness that was not seen prior in MMA and has since become the standard to become a great in the sport. When we talked about Alistair Overeem, we talked about how he accomplished the most in the least amount of fights as a kickboxer. But when we do the same thought experiment with combat sports as a whole, it's hard to go past the great Alex Pereira. In a relatively short kickboxing career, what Pereira accomplished is remarkable, capturing both the Glory middleweight title with 5 defenses and the Glory light heavyweight championship. Although this occurred during a relatively weak time in both divisions, at his peak Pereira would be considered in the top 3 pound for pound and one of the best kickboxers of his generation. His signature left hook and ability to generate powerful shots at weird angles helped him become known as one of the scariest power strikers in the sport. Again, transitioning into MMA relatively late, he did what many other combat sports athletes failed to do when transitioning to MMA, and translated what made him great in kickboxing into another Hall of Fame career in MMA. Alex Pereira reached the absolute pinnacle of 2 sports, putting together a solid argument for one of the best combat sports athletes of the modern era and, in my opinion, all time. Samart Payakaroon is often hailed as the greatest Thai fighter of all time, a title he earned through his exceptional ring IQ, lightning-fast reflexes, and success in both Muay Thai and Western boxing. Competing during Muay Thai's golden era, Samart amassed a remarkable record against the most elite competition of the time. He won multiple Lumpini championships in 4 different weight classes, a feat that automatically puts you in the elite of Muay Thai. Becoming one of the first Muay Thai fighters to gain popularity outside of Thailand, he was dubbed the Muhammad Ali of Muay Thai. Samart combined technical brilliance, lightning-fast reflexes, and exceptional fight IQ with a practical mastery of the teep kick, sweeps, and counters, setting him apart, all while his creative striking made him unpredictable and dangerous. Samart was one of the first Thai fighters to successfully transition to Western boxing, helping pave the way for future Thai fighters to make this same transition. In 1986, he won the WBC Super Bantamweight title, becoming a world champion in Western boxing and translating the hard-hitting nature and fundamentals of Thai boxing into the sweet science. Samart's career spanned over 2 decades, during which he consistently innovated his style, not only forever changing Muay Thai with his technical brilliance, but introducing the Western world to the ferocity of Muay Thai. I think the 2 most difficult sports to reach the pinnacle of is high-level wrestling and high-level MMA, and Henry Cejudo did both, for me, making him the greatest combat sports athlete to ever live. As a wrestler, Cejudo was a freak. Foregoing the traditional American wrestler route of developing in college, Cejudo skipped college wrestling entirely and jumped straight into the senior international level after time residing at the United States Olympic Training Center. This bet would pay off, as Cejudo would win gold at the 2008 Olympic Games in the 55 kg category at just 21 years of age, becoming the youngest American wrestler to ever win a gold medal. In his transition into MMA, Cejudo would initially lean heavily into his wrestling advantage, but quickly developed out his game, culminating in beating all-time great flyweight Demetrius Johnson in a rematch that highlighted Cejudo's development in the sport, while earning him his first UFC title. Cejudo would also capture the UFC's bantamweight title and become the first male athlete to defend titles in 2 divisions. It's fair to say it's going to be a very long time until we see someone match the accomplishments in combat sports that Cejudo has achieved. And although he sat out for much of his best years in MMA and doesn't quite look up to speed anymore, the fact that we can still see arguably the greatest combat sports athlete of all time compete is a privilege. So there we have it, that's my ranking of the top 20 best combat sports athlete, 1 per country. Let me know in the comment section below if you agree with my rankings. As we mentioned at the start of the video, comparing combat sports athletes across sports is impossible and just can't be done objectively. So let me know if you have any differing opinions. Thank you all for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.